The first time Dante Salvator looked at me, I had one hand inside a bucket of gray water and my brother's blood drying under my cuff. It was nearly 4 in the morning, and the east corridor of the mansion smelled like lemon polish, wet marble, and the metallic aftertaste of men who had recently decided whether someone else would live. That smell had become familiar during my 3 weeks on the night staff. I had learned the rhythms fast, the cars arrived late, the voices stayed low. The expensive shoes left rain and sometimes blood on the floors. By sunrise, the house was clean again, as if power had no residue. I worked with my head down and my mouth closed. It kept things simple. Marta Conti, the housekeeper who had hired me, said the Salvator estate valued silence the way churches valued candles. Too much noise meant somebody forgot their place. So I cleaned in silence. I carried trays in silence. I polished banisters under portraits of dead men who looked like they had never apologized for anything in silence. And under the East Drive, in a linen delivery van that smelled like bleach and diesel, my 17-year-old brother was trying not to bleed through an old blanket. I had checked on him twice already. The first time he was pale and swearing at me for crying. The second time he took my wrist and said, "Don't tell anyone his name." I hadn't asked whose knife had gone into his side. I already knew enough to be afraid of the answer, so I went back inside because there are kinds of terror that require motion. I scrubbed a dark streak off the marble outside the morning room. I changed the water when it pinked. I told myself dawn was only an hour away and then I would get him out. I was wringing a cloth when the house changed. It was not loud, that was the worst part. A murmur in Italian drifted from the far archway. Then it stopped all at once, clipped clean, as if a wire had been cut. Footsteps followed, slow, measured, impossible to mistake for anyone who needed permission to be there. Every man in that corridor went still. I looked up because everyone else had. Dante Salvator walked in without hurry. I had seen him before from the wrong end of distance, crossing the courtyard, descending the front steps. Once standing beside a fountain, while 3 older men spoke to him with the careful posture people used around lit fires. But I had never been this close. He was not loud-looking. That would have been easier. He wore a dark overcoat over a charcoal suit, no tie, collar open. His face was calm in a way that made calm seem dangerous, the kind of dangerous that did not need to prove itself. His hair was damp from mist, his hands were bare. What I noticed first, against my own will, was the stillness around him. Not in him, around him, as if the air had been taught how to behave. His gaze moved once over the corridor, taking inventory. Wet floor, staff, bucket, me. It stopped at my wrist. I had pushed my sleeve back to keep it dry. The blood had soaked through the inner cuff and dried in a dark crescent near the bone. One of the men behind him shifted instantly. Another reached under his jacket. My body understood the danger before my mind did. "Look at me," Dante said. His voice was low, not rough, not raised. Just final. I lifted my eyes. Whose blood? The corridor held its breath. I should have lied quickly. I should have cried. I should have said I'd cut myself on glass and let the house doctor stitch me and prayed Nico died quietly under the van before anybody found him. Instead, because fear made old habits surface, I looked at the stain and said, "If it dries another minute, it'll set." The words came out softer than I meant them to. Nobody moved. His gaze sharpened by 1 degree. "What?" I swallowed. "The linen," I said, nodding toward the cleaning cloth in my hand. "Blood sets if you leave it." A man to his right gave a short, disbelieving exhale that almost became a laugh and then died when Dante didn't so much as turn his head. I should have stopped talking. I never knew when to stop once the first words forced their way through. "There's cold water in the scullery," I added. "Not hot. Hot makes it worse." He stepped closer. The marble beneath my shoes felt suddenly colder. Up close, he smelled like rain, clean wool, and something darker under it. Night air and smoke, and a kind of male stillness I did not have language for. He looked down at my wrist, then at my face again. "Show me." I hesitated once. That was my mistake. The men behind him took it as defiance. One moved forward. Dante lifted 2 fingers without looking away from me. The man stopped so fast it was almost violent. I set the cloth aside and pulled the cuff back. The cut ran along the inside of my forearm. Not deep, ugly though. Nico's blood had soaked over mine when I'd pressed my sleeve to his wound in the van. The mixture made it look worse than it was. Dante took a white handkerchief from his coat pocket. It was linen, bright, monogrammed. I noticed that because noticing fabrics was one of the few things my nerves never took from me. He folded it once, twice, then reached for my arm. That should have been the moment I pulled back. He was a stranger, a dangerous one, a man I had heard named only in lowered voices. But his hand stopped a breath before touching me, as if he were allowing me the choice to refuse and already knew I wouldn't. White linen met my skin. His fingers closed over the knot of fabric and the pressure steadied the sting. His hands were warm, mine were not. "Who did this?" he asked. I looked at the handkerchief instead of his face. "It was easier. No one who matters," I said. A lie, obviously, a bad one. Something unreadable passed over his mouth. Not amusement, not quite. "Everyone bleeds because of someone who matters." I wished absurdly that he were meaner. Cruelty, I understood. Calm made mistakes in me. One of the guards bent toward him. "Boss, let us check the grounds." "Do it," Dante said. Then to me, "Name." "Alina, last name, Belandi." His thumb adjusted slightly against the linen at my wrist, firm enough to remind me he was still there. "You work nights?" "Yes." "You live on the grounds?" "No." "Who else is bleeding?" "Alina Belandi." My heart hit so hard it made my vision blink. That was the moment I knew I had already failed. Not because he had evidence, because he noticed absence, the missing tremor, the wrong amount of blood, the fact that I was more tired than hurt. Men like him did not need confession. They built them from seams. I should have kept silent. Instead I said, "Please don't send them under the East Drive." It came out raw, too fast. His eyes changed, not softened. "That would have been easier too." They focused. "There it is," he murmured almost to himself. "The truth." The men moved before I heard the order. Boots hit stone, radios crackled low. The corridor that had stood frozen snapped into coordinated life. I caught his sleeve with my free hand without thinking. The room reacted like I'd touched a weapon. Dante looked at my fingers on his coat. I let go immediately. "My brother," I whispered. "He's 17. A beat passed, then another. "He saw something," I said. "That's all." I just needed until morning. His jaw tightened once. It was the first sign he was made of flesh. "Quiet one," he said, and it was not affectionate. It was an assessment. A claim over the problem I had become. "You should have led with that." I hated that the name landed inside me. He turned and gave the next command in Italian, clipped and fast. I caught only half of it. "East Drive, alive, doctor." Then he looked back at me. "You're coming with me." I thought of Nico under the van, of the gates. Of the last rent notice folded inside my bag in the servant's locker. Of the stupid private prayer I had made every night since starting here. "Let me stay invisible one more day." But invisibility had an expiration date in houses like his. "Please," I said. He held my gaze. "No one leaves until I know whose blood entered my house." He took my bucket from my hand and set it aside as if that small, ordinary act settled the matter. Then he stepped back and the corridor opened for him the way people opened roads for funerals. I followed because 4 armed men were suddenly behind me, and because my brother was under his ground, and because the white linen tied around my wrist had already begun to feel less like a bandage than a boundary. At the end of the hall, a heavy door shut somewhere deep inside the mansion, then the outer gates locked. By sunrise, my brother was stitched, sedated, and furious. He lay in a guest room on the second floor of the staff wing, one hand flung over his eyes like he could hide from consequences by refusing to look at them. The doctor had finished an hour before and left behind the smell of disinfectant, clipped instructions, and a warning not to let him move much. Nico moved anyway. "If you hadn't brought me here," he muttered, "I'd be gone by now. You'd be dead by now." He lowered his arm enough to glare at me. At 17, my brother had not yet learned that anger worked best when it wasn't afraid. His fear showed through everything. I poured water from the glass pitcher on the bedside table. The room was too beautiful for panic. Cream walls, tall windows, a carved wardrobe older than our family's entire known history. From outside came the soft slap of fountain water in the east courtyard, and farther off, the muted grind of tires on gravel. Nico pushed himself up on one elbow and winced. "Did you tell him?" "No." "Did he ask?" "Yes." "That's basically the same thing." I wanted to tell him that in the presence of Dante Salvator, nothing felt basic. Even standing still felt like a decision you could be punished for making wrong. I handed him the glass. "Drink." Instead, he watched me. "Are we prisoners?" Before I could answer, someone knocked once and walked in on the same motion. Marta Conti carried a tray with broth, bread, and 2 boiled eggs arranged with such old-school severity that it looked like a test. She was in her 60s, sturdy, silver-haired, and had the kind of face that had never needed softness to be kind. When she set the tray down, her eyes went first to Nico's bandage and only then to me. "That broth cost me an argument with the cook," she said. "Show gratitude." "Thank you," Nico muttered. "Not you," Marta said. "You look like trouble. I was speaking to your sister." I almost smiled. Marta folded her hands into the front of her apron. "The boss says you both stay here until this is understood." Nico made a sound under his breath. Marta heard it. "Of course she did. You should save your strength." Sarcasm burns calories. That got a startled bark out of him, which turned into a grimace when his stitches objected. She looked at me then, more seriously. "Has he questioned you again?" "No, he will." "I know." Her gaze dipped to my wrist. The white handkerchief was gone. The doctor had cleaned and dressed the cut properly. but I still felt the phantom pressure of linen at my skin. Marta lowered her voice. If he asks, answer what he asks, not more, not less. Men like him don't punish words, they punish shape. If your story changes shape, you'll regret it. You talk about him like weather. That's because he arrives like it. She left us with the tray and a look that told me sympathy had limits in this house. Useful information. An hour later, a different knock came, too fast, too cheerful. The man who entered looked like somebody had built a cathedral and then taught it to complain. He was enormous. Black suit, broad shoulders, close-cropped beard, face too expressive for this place. He carried a clipboard in one hand and a green apple in the other, as if undecided whether he was managing logistics or auditioning for sainthood. Nino Bianchi, he announced. Driver, security rotation, occasional victim of this household's culinary sabotage. Nico blinked. Nino pointed the apple at him. You're the brother, congratulations on not dying in our driveway. Very inconvenient paperwork when that happens. I stared, he looked offended. That was comforting, in my family we call that comforting. What do you want? I asked. His expression brightened in a way that suggested my lack of gratitude was expected and therefore relaxing. Boss wants the girl downstairs in 10 minutes, not the brother. He stays horizontal and contemplates poor life decisions. Nico crossed his arms. Nino sighed toward the ceiling. Young men are exhausting. You think you're immortal until somebody stitches you with proper thread. He checked something on the clipboard, then squinted at me. Also, if Maria asks, I did not eat any bread from the kitchen this morning. I glanced at the untouched apple. Did you? His face went solemn. Miss Belandi, I am in a committed relationship with suffering. Bread is betrayal. Nico snorted despite himself. Nino pointed triumphantly. You hear that? I'm a healer. He lowered his voice theatrically. Also, if you ever see geese on the south lawn, go the other way, they're agents of chaos. When I said nothing, he frowned. You don't respect trauma unless it's elegant. This is why people like me are misunderstood. He left on a sigh about carbohydrates and unreturned devotion, and the room felt less suffocating after he was gone. Which I suspected was his real talent. I found Dante in a breakfast room I would have called a ballroom if there hadn't been coffee on the table. The room was all cream stone and long windows. Sunlight had spilled in across the floor, but it did not soften him. He stood at the far end near a sideboard, reading something in a slim black folder. A man I recognized from the night before, older, silver at the temples, elegant in a severe way, stood beside him. Consigliere, I guessed before he was introduced. Dante closed the folder and looked at me. Sit. I did not. The older man's mouth almost moved, not quite a smile. Giacomo Serra, he said. I make problems legible. That sounds ominous, I said before caution could stop me. It usually is. Dante took the chair at the head of the table but did not invite Giacomo to do the same. That told me something I didn't yet know how to use. Nico Belandi, Dante said, saw 3 men unloading product from one of my linen trucks near the Western Chapel wall at midnight. I stared. Your brother ran, Giacomo said gently as if that helped. They caught him before he cleared the service road. Product? I asked. Dante's gaze never left my face. Heroin? The word made the room tilt. No, I said immediately. No what? No to that being yours. It was stupid, reckless, probably suicidal, but it came out with a certainty I could not explain. Giacomo's brows lifted. Dante went very still. And why would you say that? Because the man in front of me looked like 1,000 bad things and somehow not that one. Because houses tell on people if you know where to look, and this one was built on control, not rot. Because Marta called him weather, not filth. Because something in my body had already decided the difference mattered. I looked at the coffee service instead of him. If it were yours, he'd be dead. Silence. I wished instantly I could take it back. Giacomo turned his head slightly, studying me now as if I were suddenly literate in a language he hadn't expected. Dante set his espresso cup down without drinking from it. Interesting. Was I wrong? No, he said, which means someone is using my roots. The air in the room sharpened. I wrapped my hands together to keep them still, then let my brother go. No, anger rose so fast it steadied me. You said it isn't yours. I said he saw something that matters to me. Dante leaned back in his chair, eyes on me unreadable. That makes him valuable, it also makes him bait. My throat tightened. You can't, I can. His voice did not change. The better question is whether I will. I hated that I noticed his hands at a time like that, strong, quiet hands. The kind that could break a man's jaw and fold linen with the same efficiency. What do you want? I asked. The truth, full names. Everything your brother saw. He's terrified. He can be terrified in safety. I looked at Giacomo. And what happens after? Giacomo answered, but his eyes flicked once toward Dante before he did. That depends on whether you give us reason to believe you belong to the problem. I laughed once. It came out thin. I clean your floors. Dante's gaze dropped deliberately to my bandaged wrist. You bled in my corridor and worried about the stain before yourself, he said. Women in my world lie prettier than that. Heat rose under my skin for reasons I refused to name. He stood. The room seemed to reorganize around the motion. He came around the table and stopped close enough that I had to tip my chin back to meet his eyes. From this moment, he said, you and your brother remain on these grounds. For how long? For as long as I say. That isn't an answer. It's the only one that matters. I should have stepped back. I didn't. His nearness pressed against my nerves like weather before lightning. Quiet one, he said, and this time it sounded less like a diagnosis and more like a warning made personal. Do not test the gate. Then he walked past me. And the temperature of the room changed with him. By the third day, I knew the mansion had two kinds of silence. There was staff silence, the practical kind made of lowered eyes, soft shoes, and the understanding that walls in wealthy houses had never believed in privacy. And there was Dante's silence. That one traveled, you could feel it move ahead of him through rooms, men stood straighter in it, arguments folded, phones stopped ringing mid-sentence. Even the old clock seemed to tick with more caution when he was near. I kept telling myself I was learning the house, not him. The house helped. It was impossible, beautiful, and faintly absurd. A Sicilian palazzo expanded over a century until it became a stitched thing. Chapel wing, citrus courtyard, old family rooms closed to most of the staff. New glass offices looking over gardens where no one laughed loudly. Marble everywhere, iron keys, doors with the particular heavy swing of old money. At 3 a.m, the floors held cold like a grudge. Marta put me back to work on the second day, which I took as mercy. Idle minds make bad decisions, she said, handing me a basket of linens and a small tin of powdered starch. What about occupied minds? They make quieter ones, so I worked, it let me breathe. That afternoon, she brought me to a sitting room no longer used except for important guests and impossible memories. Sunlight fell across a long chaise and a table covered with folded household linens, damask runners, lace-edged napkins, a yellowed altar cloth with a singe mark near one corner. Marta touched the cloth carefully. His mother loved this one. I ran my fingers over the weave before I could stop myself. Fine Irish linen, old, hand-finished edge. The scorch had weakened the threads but not ruined them. You know fabric, she said. A little, that is not a little touch, I exhaled. My mother worked in hotel laundry when I was small. Later, a seamstress near the market let me help after school. I learned how to mend before I learned how to rest. Marta watched me test the burn with the pad of my thumb. Can you save it? Yes. The word slipped out with more certainty than I'd shown about anything since arriving. Something softened in her face. Then do, so I did. I spent an hour separating damaged threads with a needle fine enough to feel like thought. The work narrowed the world to texture and patience. Burned edge, surviving thread, tension, release. Things ruined slowly could sometimes be repaired the same way. I did not hear Dante enter, I felt it. That sudden, altered pressure in the room, not fear exactly. Recognition, I looked up. He stood in the doorway with Giacomo just behind him, both men in dark suits, both watching me. Giacomo with obvious interest. Dante with less obvious interest, which was somehow worse. Marta said you could restore it, he said. I lowered the needle. If no one breathes on me. Giacomo actually smiled. Dante did not, but something moved once small at the edge of his mouth. Then I'll have the household stop. The line should not have affected me. It did. I glanced at the cloth instead. This was scorched by candle wax, not fire. You can tell? Yes. How? Wax burns differently, cleaner, it leaves a kind of edge. He took a step into the room. What else can you tell? I wished he wouldn't ask questions like that. They always felt larger than the subject. That somebody tried to scrub it after, I said. Hard, probably in a hurry. They almost made it worse. Giacomo's eyes slid toward Dante. I noticed, so did Dante. What? I asked. Nothing, Giacomo said too quickly. Dante ignored him. You see what other people disturb. I set the needle down because his attention made my hands less steady than thread deserved. When your job is to erase signs of damage, you get good at recognizing panic. It took me one breath too long to realize what I had admitted. His gaze held mine. There it was again, that feeling of standing too near a cliff edge and being unable to tell whether the danger was falling or wanting to see the view. Your brother gave names, Giacomo said at last, perhaps to puncture whatever had thickened in the room. 2 of them are dead, 1 is missing. Dead? I asked. Before we reach them, Dante said. My stomach turned, so someone got there first. Yes, someone close, I said quietly. Neither man answered. That was answer enough. Later, while I was carrying a basket of pressed linens through the West Service hallway, I found the laundry cart. It sat just inside the loading room, empty except for a single bullet lodged in the wood near the handle. Not fresh blood this time. Older, cleaned badly. I set the basket down and touched the splintered edge around the metal. Cold, sharp, a voice behind me said, "You're not supposed to be in here alone." I turned. Giacomo stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. He looked less severe without Dante beside him. More tired, maybe, more human. That made him easier to mistrust. "I was putting these away, and now you're investigating." "I'm cleaning." He glanced at the bullet. "Same thing, sometimes." He came closer, but not too close. "You should know something, Alina." I didn't like hearing my name from him. "When powerful men grow interested," he said, "women in houses like this often mistake observation for safety." My fingers tightened around the linen in the basket. "Is that a warning?" "Yes, from you, from age." I looked past him into the corridor. "Do you warn all the staff?" "Only the ones the boss notices." Heat rose at once, unwelcome and humiliating. "I'm noticed because my brother is a witness." Perhaps. He let the word hang. I hated him for that. When he left, I stood alone in the loading room and stared at the bullet in the cart until the house seemed to contract around it. A shot fired where linens were moved. Roots used for heroin, Dante said, wasn't his. Dead men reached before he could reach them. A warning from Giacomo. Interest from Dante. Too many shapes, not enough names. That evening, I took a tray of coffee to Dante's office because Marta said somebody had to, and the footman had disappeared with a stomachache that looked suspiciously strategic. His office doors were open. Inside, the room was mostly shadow and late gold light. Books, dark wood, tall windows over the western grove, no clutter, no wasted movement like him. He stood at the far side of the desk, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled. He was on the phone in Sicilian, too fast for me to follow. Angry? No, worse. Cold enough that whoever was on the other end went silent for long stretches. I set the tray down carefully. His eyes lifted to me. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. My hand was still on the silver coffee pot. He had one hand flat on the desk, the other holding the phone to his ear. I noticed the vein in his wrist, the faint shadow of stubble at his jaw. The way tiredness sharpened him instead of softening. Then he said something final into the phone and ended the call. "You found the cart." It wasn't a question. "Yes, you shouldn't go where you're told not to. You shouldn't leave bullets in laundry rooms." That should have gone badly. Instead, he stared at me long enough that my pulse became a sound. Then very quietly he said, "No, I shouldn't." He came around the desk. I told myself not to step back. He stopped close enough for me to smell coffee and the colder note beneath his cologne. "Outside air, recent night. There's a war opening under my roof," he said. "Until I close it, you don't move through this house alone. I'm not a child." "No." His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth and then returned to my eyes before I could decide if I imagined it. "Children are easier." The words went through me wrong. A knock at the open door broke the moment. Nino leaned in, looked from Dante to me and sighed toward heaven. I knew it. One skipped meal and the whole house gets dramatic. Dante did not turn. "Nino?" "Yes, boss, I regret living every day." "Walk Alina back to the staff wing." Nino saluted with unnecessary sorrow. "As commanded, if we are attacked, I'll throw my apple." When I passed Dante, the air seemed to tighten again. I did not look at him, I felt him watch me anyway. Dante, she moved through his house like she had been trained by grief, quiet, exact, always one step from apology she never offered aloud. He should have seen only risk, a witness's sister. A complication. Instead, he kept seeing white linen over blood and the impossible steadiness of a woman who, cornered, had worried about the stain. No one in his world had ever done that, not for him. Not in front of him. He did not know what to do with the fact that it mattered. When Nino led me away, I kept my hands clasped because I did not trust them not to shake. At the end of the corridor, the loading room bullet seemed to follow me through the house like an omen I hadn't learned to read. Someone was already moving against him. The fast mystery broke open in the chapel. It happened on the fourth night, after rain had made the stones outside sweat and the old family wing smelled faintly of wet earth pushing up through history. Marta sent me with a stack of cleaned altar linens because the morning sacristan had slipped on the front steps and broken his wrist. In houses like this, accidents were just scheduling problems with sharper edges. The chapel sat off a narrow corridor near the west garden wall. Small for the size of the estate, but old enough to feel separate from the rest of the mansion. Whitewashed ceiling, dark pews, a saint with a chipped hand, beeswax and stone. Dante was already there. He stood near the altar rail with his back to me, jacket off, sleeves rolled, one hand braced against the end of a pew as Giacomo spoke to him in low, urgent Italian. I should have retreated. Instead, I froze in the doorway because something in the scene held me there. Giacomo stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. Dante turned. There was blood on his knuckles, not much. Fresh enough to shine. He looked at the linens in my arms, then at my face. "What are you doing here?" Marta sent me. His gaze flicked once to Giacomo, who took the dismissal and left without argument. That bothered me more than if he'd protested. When the door shut behind him, the chapel grew quieter than silence. I set the folded cloths on the first pew. "You're bleeding." He looked at his hand like it belonged to someone else. "It happens." The answer irritated me. I wasn't sure why, maybe because it sounded like a rule he'd given himself permission to live under. Without thinking too hard, I crossed to the sacristy sink, wet a clean square of linen, and came back. He watched the whole time. When I held the cloth out, he didn't take it. "You're ordering me now?" he asked. "I'm preventing stains." That earned me the smallest exhale, not quite laughter, dangerous because it made me want to hear it again. I stepped closer. "Sit." "Interesting choice. Do you want blood on your chapel linen?" "No." "Then sit." To my surprise, he did. He lowered himself onto the end of the front pew, one forearm resting on his knee, and I stood between him and the altar like somebody who had forgotten the rules and not yet been punished for it. Up close, the cut on his hand was split skin across two knuckles, not grave, deep enough to matter. "How?" I asked. "Wall? You hit a wall?" "Yes." "That seems expensive." His eyes lifted to mine. "The wall survived." I pressed the damp linen to his hand before I could smile at that. The contact jolted through me anyway. His skin was warm, the kind of warmth that felt deliberate. He didn't pull away, he didn't help either. He simply let me touch him, and that was somehow more intimate than if he'd taken over. "You don't ask permission often," he said. "I ask when I think no is possible." And now, I wrapped the cloth around his knuckles. "Now I think you'd rather bleed than admit this hurts." For one suspended moment, I became aware of everything at once. My breath, his breath, the candle crackle near the altar. The night rain tapping the leaded glass, how close I was standing between his knees, how easily he could have changed that distance, how carefully he didn't. It frightened me that I noticed his restraint before I noticed my own. "Your brother talked more," he said quietly. I tied the cloth. "That doesn't sound difficult." One corner of his mouth moved. "Nico saw Alessio Romano's men," Dante said, "using one of my linen roots to move heroin through the chapel loading wall." The name landed with weight, even I knew it. Alessio was older than Dante, family by blood and business, spoken of in the staff quarters with the same complicated caution people used for old knives. "Your family," I said. "Yes," the word settled like iron. I looked at the crucifix above the altar because it was easier than looking at him. "So you were right." "Someone close?" "I'm often right." "That must be tiring." He watched me with that unreadable stillness. "You're nervous, you talk more when you're nervous." Heat climbed my neck. "And you notice too much." "It's how I stayed alive." Something in the way he said it made me finally look at him again. There are silences that ask not to be opened. I opened this one anyway. "How did you get the scar?" I asked softly, glancing at the pale line near his wrist I hadn't noticed before. The question changed the room. His body did not tense, it stilled in a different way. "Memory, not threat." For a long beat he said nothing. Then, "laundry hook." That was it, not a speech, not an explanation, just two words so flat they felt heavier than any story. And because my stupid heart had never once protected me with enough intelligence, I imagined him younger. A room full of sheets, metal, blood, a moment no one reached in time. I lowered my hand. He reached out then, slow enough for refusal, and touched one finger under my chin, lifting it a fraction when I tried to look away. "Don't do that," he said. "Do what?" "Pity me." It wasn't pity. What was it? I opened my mouth and nothing came. Outside, footsteps pounded past the chapel. Nino's voice rang faintly through the corridor. "If this is about the geese again, I refuse. I have rights." The ridiculousness of it hit me so suddenly I made a sound halfway between a laugh and a choke. Dante's thumb remained under my chin 1 second longer than necessary. That was almost number one I could name. Then he let go. A second later, Nino burst through the chapel door, stopped dead, looked at us, looked at Dante's hand wrapped in altar linen, and closed his eyes briefly like a man praying against evidence. "Boss," he said with forced solemnity, "I hate to interrupt whatever this emotionally devastating tableau is. But the kitchen staff are threatening mutiny because Maria caught Paolo stealing focaccia and somehow I'm implicated." I stared. Dante stood. "How? Love," Nino said bitterly, "or perhaps class warfare." Dante's expression remained unchanged. "Anything relevant?" Nino sobered instantly. The Westguard found a burned ledger page in the boiler room. "Same laundry marks Elena described yesterday." I went still. "I described those to Giacomo." Silence. The three of us felt it land together. Dante looked at me first. That was worse than accusation. "I thought he should know," I said. "He handles accounts." Nino muttered, "Ah, excellent." "We are all going to suffer." Guilt hit so hard it made my knees weak. Dante's face gave nothing away. "Go to your room." I was trying to help. "I know." His voice was quiet enough to cut. "That doesn't change the result." He turned to Nino. "Double the second-floor guards. No one enters the staff wing without my word." Nino nodded and disappeared with unusual speed. I stayed where I was because leaving under the weight of my own mistake felt impossible. I made it worse, I whispered. Dante looked at the wrapped cloth on his hand as if reminding himself to keep hold of something. Yes, he said, the honesty burned. Then he crossed to the pew, picked up the remaining folded linens and put them carefully into my arms one by one as if I were still capable of carrying what had been entrusted to me. Go, he said. So I did. But all the way back to the staff wing, I could still feel the ghost of his finger under my chin and hear the single, quiet fact beneath everything else. My mistake had reached someone close enough to hear it. The next morning, Marta found me trying to scrape guilt out of a copper pan that did not deserve my violence. You'll ruin the finish, she said. I already ruin other things. She took the pan from my hands and set it aside. The kitchen was warm with bread ovens and bitter coffee, all copper hooks and hanging herbs, the windows fogged from stock simmering on the back range. Somewhere near the stove, Maria, the cook Nino apparently intended to die yearning for, was rolling pasta with the expression of a woman who had no patience for male suffering in any form. Marta leaned against the central table. If the house falls because a frightened girl trusted the wrong man once, then the house was already rotten. That doesn't help. It isn't supposed to. It's supposed to be true. I rubbed my palms on my skirt. Did he say anything? No, that was worse. Marta's face softened by a fraction. When he says nothing, don't assume the worst. What should I assume? That he's thinking, I'm not sure that's better. It is. By noon I had been reassigned to the old linen rooms, which felt deliberate in a way I did not enjoy. Sunlight came thin through high windows. Tall shelves held stacks of pressed sheets tied with ribbons by size, season, room. The whole place smelled like starch, cedar, and a past no one had fully emptied out. I found the hidden page by accident. One of the old formal tablecloths, unused for years, stored in a muslin cover, had a weight in the hem that didn't match the rest. I was checking for moth damage when my fingers caught the unnatural stiffness. I unpicked 3 stitches with a pin. A narrow strip of paper slid into my hand. Accounts, initials, delivery dates. Not many, enough. I had just enough time to understand that someone had used household linen storage as a hiding place before the door opened behind me. Giacomo stood there. My whole body went cold. His expression did not change when he saw the paper in my hand. If anything, it gentled. Alina, he said. You should have left that alone. I stepped back instinctively, the table edge striking my thighs. You told me to be careful, I said. You didn't mean of you. I meant of all of this. The careful sadness in his voice would have worked better if I hadn't already learned to distrust sadness on men with power. You used my mistake, I said. He closed the door behind him, quietly. I used an opening that you handed me, Giacomo finished softly. That does not make me the villain. It makes you careless. He held out his hand for the paper. I looked at it. Long fingers, elegant watch. A man who probably signed death orders with the same neat patience he used to button his cuffs. Then I looked past him toward the work table where Marta kept pins, thread, and a small silver seam ripper for damaged hems. You told me to be careful, I said. I did, so I am. His eyes sharpened. He moved a fraction too late. I backed into the table, palmed the strip of paper, and pressed it under the loose hem at my hip. My fingers found a pin by instinct more than sight. One push, one catch, not stitched, not properly, but enough to hold if no one dragged their hands over my skirt. Giacomo saw the movement. His expression lost its patience. Give it to me. Why? Because if Dante sees that page before I explain it, men will die too quickly. Men are already dying quickly. He took one step toward me. I hated that I still wanted him to deny what my body had already decided. Did you use my brother? I asked. His face changed in the smallest way. Weariness, perhaps. Or the memory of being young enough to call compromise by its true name. I used a moment, he said. That is what men in my position do. My father used to say that before he hit the wall instead of me. The words slipped out before I could stop them. For the first time, Giacomo looked startled. Then the door opened. Dante came in without knocking, Nino at his shoulder. The room froze into shapes. Giacomo turned first, smooth again. The old inventory room, he said. Your guest has an unfortunate curiosity. Nino took one look at my face, one look at Giacomo's, and muttered, excellent. I love rooms that smell like lies before lunch. Dante's gaze moved over all of us and settled on me. What did you find? If I lied now, I'd lose him. If I told the truth badly, I might lose my brother, so I chose the smallest true thing, a page hidden in the hem of one of the old tablecloths. Giacomo's jaw hardened. Dante noticed. Where is it? He asked. I looked at him, really looked. The calm, the danger, the infuriating way he always seemed to know when silence was fear and when it was thought. Then I reached under the seam at my hip, pulled the paper free, and gave it to him. Giacomo exhaled once through his nose. Careless, he murmured, though I couldn't tell whether he meant me or himself. Dante unfolded the strip. His eyes scanned the marks. Not names exactly, not numbers in any clean ledger sense. Tiny notches, initials, delivery abbreviations, stitch counts written like instructions. Do you understand it? He asked Giacomo. Before Giacomo could answer, I said, I do. All three men looked at me, heat crawled up my throat. It isn't written like accounts, I said, it's a tailor's code. My father used to mark measurements that way when clients wanted privacy. Dante's expression did not change, but something alert moved underneath it. Your father was a tailor. Yes. For whom? I swallowed. There it was. The secret I had kept buried under practical things: rent, groceries, Nico's school shoes, silence. For anyone who paid. Hotels, funeral houses, sometimes Romano men. I forced the rest out. He altered jackets for them. He hid cash in hems, notes too. When they didn't want paper found in pockets. Nino let out a low whistle. That family really does ruin everything with stitching. Dante stepped closer and handed me the strip. Read it. My fingers trembled once before they steadied. Tiny cut marks along the margin. A slash through one initial, doubled thread counts where there should have been single. It's a schedule, I said, dates disguised as seam lengths, locations in laundry abbreviations. WC could be West Chapel, SH is probably South House Stores. I kept reading, then my stomach turned. This one says tonight. Where? I looked up. The old Quarry Road gate. Nino groaned. Wonderful. I had almost convinced myself the day might be boring. Dante was still watching me, not the paper. Why didn't you tell me about your father? Because he was ashamed, I said, and because he taught me things I hate being good at. The room went quiet. Dante took the paper back, but his fingers brushed mine on the exchange, just once, barely. It still went through me like a struck wire. What else? He asked. I turned to the table where the scorched altar cloth still lay under weights from the day before. The repaired section caught the light, not invisible, strong. You don't erase damage, I said, touching the restored weave. You reinforce where it split, otherwise it opens again. I didn't mean it for him, I knew I didn't. But when I looked up, his gaze had gone to the cloth and stayed there too long. That was almost number 4. Boss, Nino said carefully, do I have permission to be nervous now? You had it yesterday, Dante said. Nino nodded with grave relief. Thank God. Giacomo moved toward the door. I'll alert the road teams. No, Dante said, one word, quiet, absolute. Giacomo stopped. Dante folded the coded strip once and slipped it into his inner pocket. No one moves until I decide who heard about this page before I did. Air sharpened. Giacomo's face cooled into something polished and dangerous. You suspect me, I suspect proximity. My pulse stumbled. Dante looked at me then, and I understood with a sick lurch that he knew exactly how Giacomo had come upon me so quickly. He knew my mistake had not finished costing us. He also knew I knew it. Quiet one, he said, and there was no softness in it yet, only possession over the fact of me, with me. I followed him out because I had no choice, because I wanted one anyway. Because when the door shut behind us, I realized the shape of my fear had changed. I no longer thought I was afraid of him. I thought I might be afraid of where I kept turning when everything else went dark. By sunset, the house moved like a wound trying not to show blood. Men crossed corridors in silence. Cars were brought around but not parked in the usual places. The cook sent up trays no one touched. Rain pressed against the high windows in a fine, steady mist that made the gardens look blurred at the edges, as if the estate itself were trying to retreat from what was coming. Nico was transferred to a safer room without explanation. Marta packed a bag for me with the expression of a woman too wise to call anything temporary if armed men were involved. What is this? I asked as she folded a sweater I hadn't known was mine now. Clothes, she said. I can see that. Then your eyesight remains excellent under pressure. Good, she added stockings, soap, my comb, and the repaired altar cloth for reasons I did not understand until she said, if you leave something unfinished in this house, it finds you later. When I reached for the cloth, her hand covered mine. You made a mistake, she said. Don't build your whole life around deserving it. I almost cried then, which would have been humiliating in a room full of folded underthings and practical mercy. Instead, I nodded and put the cloth into the bag. Downstairs, Nino was supervising cars and failing to hide his outrage at reality. I have had half an apple and 3 almonds, he informed me the moment he saw me. If gunfire begins, I will faint artistically. You always talk like this before a crisis. No, sometimes I pray. But God and I are in a passive-aggressive period. He took my bag, peered inside, and looked personally offended by the sweater. Gray. We are sending you into danger dressed like weather. Before I could answer, Dante came down the front steps. Black coat, no tie, gun at his back, another at his shoulder. The kind of readiness that made every other man nearby seem suddenly made of lesser material. Rain had darkened his hair at the temples. He saw me, saw the bag in Nino's hand, and came straight to us. You ride with me, he said. Nino clutched his chest. At last, a demotion I can rest. You're driving the second car. I knew happiness was a trick. Dante opened the rear door himself. I should have gotten in without argument. Instead, I looked toward the lit windows of the staff wing, where Nico was being watched by two armed men, and said, "If something happens, nothing happens to your brother tonight." The certainty in his voice might have reassured me if I hadn't begun to understand what it cost him to promise anything. I got in. The car smelled like leather, rain, and his colder scent underneath, cologne layered over outside darkness. The windows blurred with weather as soon as the doors shut. Dante slid in beside me, not touching, close enough that the heat of him changed the air anyway. Neither of us spoke until the gates opened. Then he said, "I'm moving you to the coastal house. That sounds like kidnapping with sea air." His gaze shifted to me. "You still joke when you're frightened." "I'm not joking." No, the wipers beat time against the glass. We passed the West Chapel wall, the loading road, the line of cypress trees standing black and narrow against the evening. "Why am I really going?" I asked. "Because the coded page named the quarry road. And the only people who knew I'd send you away by that route are in this convoy." Ice ran through me. I turned to the window, trying to see behind us through the rain. Headlights, one car, then Nino-S, then darkness. "If there's a traitor in your men," I said, "why bring me at all?" "Because leaving you at the house would be easier to predict." I looked back at him. "So I'm bait again." His jaw tightened. "No, it feels like it. That does not make it true." I wanted to say something sharp. Instead, I noticed his hand braced against the seat between us, steady despite the road. I wondered what it would feel like if he moved it 1 inch farther. I hated that thought enough to go silent. The ambush came where the road narrowed beside the abandoned quarry wall. The first sign was not the gunfire. It was the van. A white laundry van sat crooked across the lane ahead, back doors hanging open. In the wash of our headlights, I saw the stitched Salvator crest on the rear tarp flap. Backward, every monogram in the house had the S curled left, this one curled right. Dante, I didn't finish. I grabbed his sleeve and pointed. He saw it at once. Down, he hit me with his arm and shoved me flat just as the windshield burst. Glass exploded inward, tires screamed. The driver cursed in Sicilian and yanked the wheel. Bullets slammed metal. Behind us, Nino's horn blared once, furious and sustained like an insult. The car slewed sideways. Dante was already moving. One hand locked over the back of my neck, pinning me low. The other drew his gun and fired through the fractured side window with a terrifying economy. No rage, no wasted motion. Just decision after decision rendered in muzzle flash. Someone shouted outside, then stopped shouting. The car stopped hard enough to throw my shoulder into the door. "Stay down," Dante said. He was out before I could answer. Rain hit my face through the broken glass. Gunfire cracked across stone, men yelling, one body falling against the hood with a sound I would hear in sleep later. I raised my head once, just enough to see him. He moved through the rain like he'd been carved for it. Coat open, gun steady. The stillness I had noticed in him on that first night was gone now, replaced by something colder and far more frightening, speed without panic. He reached the van, dragged one man out by the throat, shot another before the second could finish lifting his weapon. Then turned because someone behind the quarry wall had aimed toward the rear car, where Nino was swearing and firing from behind a door. "Boss," Nino shouted, "if I die hungry, Maria wins." Even then, absurdly, Dante's mouth nearly moved. A bullet tore across Dante's upper arm. I heard myself scream his name. That was how I knew how bad it was. He didn't flinch. He pivoted, fired twice, and the shooter dropped behind the wall. Then he yanked open my door. "Can you move?" "Yes." Blood ran dark down his sleeve. Rain ran cold down both of us. "Good," he said. "Move." Dante, she had seen the backward monogram before any of his men. Even under fear, even under rain, she had noticed the lie in the stitch. And when the windshield blew, she had called his name like it mattered whether he answered. He had known desire before. Possession, hunger, none of that was this. This was the same impossible thing as the first night, a woman bleeding and still seeing what was wrong in the linen before she saw herself. He wanted her more than was wise. He wanted her alive more than that. The coastal house sat above the sea, stone and shuttered windows and salt worked into every crack of the terrace walls. By the time we reached it, my knees were shaking from delayed fear and Dante's shirt sleeve had gone nearly black with blood. The house doctor met us at the door. So did Nino, alive, muddy, and deeply offended by the universe. "I was grazed," he told no one in particular, touching a tear in his jacket. "This suit was tailored. If I survive, I'm billing the family." Inside, while the doctor cut Dante's sleeve open, I stood in the kitchen with my hands pressed flat to the marble and tried to stop trembling hard enough to think. He came in 20 minutes later with a clean bandage wrapped high around his arm. "You should be lying down," I said. "So should you. Your definition of rest is terrible." He leaned one hip against the counter. There was sea wind under his cologne now. Salt, rain, blood cleaned away but not gone from my mind. You saved us, he said. No, I saw a stitch. You saw the right one. Silence pressed close. I reached for the roll of white kitchen linen near the breadboard and tore off a strip before I realized what I was doing. The doctor wrapped that badly. His eyes dropped to the cloth. Then back to me. Come here, I said softer. He did. I retied the bandage more firmly, my fingers clumsy now for an entirely different reason. His body stayed very still while I worked, too still. As if restraint had become a physical labor. When I finished, I didn't step back quickly enough. He touched my jaw with the backs of his fingers, barely there, almost number 5. Alina, he said. I should have answered, I didn't. I should leave this room. Probably, he exhaled once, quiet one. It landed differently this time, not cold, not warm either, something more dangerous. Care still trying to pretend it was command. I looked at the white linen under my hands and said the truest thing I had. I don't know how to do this carefully. His composure cracked by a fraction. That's why I keep stopping, he said. Then he kissed me, not hard, not claiming, slow enough that I had time to feel every part of myself deciding to stay. His mouth was warm and careful and restrained in a way that almost hurt more than if he had taken. My fingers caught in his shirt. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled back first, forehead touching mine. That's all, then don't lie to me, I whispered. His mouth brushed mine once more, almost reverent, and then he stepped back so abruptly it felt like being left in cold water after heat. He dragged a hand over his face, the bandage at his arm bright against the dark shirt, and looked at the ceiling as if patience might be stored there in useful quantities. That, he said at last, voice rougher now, was already more than I should have taken. I touched my lips. I hated that he saw me do it. I didn't think you took anything. His eyes came back to me. No, I should have looked away. I didn't. That was almost number 6. A burst of static snapped from the radio on the far counter. Then Nino's voice, strained enough to strip the comedy from it. Boss, Dante was moving before the second syllable finished. He crossed the kitchen, hit the receiver, and said, talk. From where I stood, I could hear only fragments under static and sea wind. Southgate, fire in the service courtyard. Marta, Nico moved, 2 men down, 1 inside. Dante's face changed by degrees so small anyone else might have missed them. I didn't. What happened? I asked when he set the radio down. He was already reaching for his coat on the chair back. They hit the mansion. The room seemed to tilt. My brother, alive. Marta, a beat. Wounded? The word went through me like ice. Marta, who had packed my bag with clean hands and plain truths. Marta, who had seen what I was before I did. I grabbed the edge of the counter. Because of me, because of war, Dante said. That war followed me. It would have arrived whether I touched you or not. But there it was in the way he said touched. Nino's voice crackled again. Boss, if you intend to leave me here defending the coastline with half a magazine and my exceptional personality, I'd like to lodge a formal complaint. Dante snatched up the radio. Lock the lower gate, no one in, no one out, I'm coming back. He turned to me. The decision in his face was so complete it was almost frightening. You stay here? No. Alina, no. I could still taste him, which made defying him feel both more difficult and more necessary. If Marta is hurt and Nico is there, I'm not staying by the sea while everyone bleeds for me. His jaw hardened. This is not your decision. It became my decision when your war learned my name. For one dangerous second, I thought he might simply pick me up and lock me in one of the upstairs rooms until dawn. Instead, he stepped close enough that I had to lift my chin. Listen carefully, he said. When we leave this room, you do exactly what I tell you. No improvising, no wandering. No choosing the wrong man to trust because he sounds tired and kind. The shot landed where it should have. I swallowed. All right. His hand came up like he meant to touch my face again. He stopped himself halfway, let it fall, and took the white strip of linen I had wrapped around his arm. With quick, efficient fingers, he retied the knot tighter. Same gesture, new meaning. Quiet one, he said, and now it sounded like a prayer he didn't believe he was allowed to make. Stay where I can reach you. Then he took his gun from the table. And the house by the sea became only a pause between one violence and the next. Outside, the wind had turned sharp off the water. The sea below the cliffs looked black enough to swallow a country. As the gates opened and the cars rolled toward the road back to Palermo, I pressed my shaking hand to my mouth and looked out at the dark. War had arrived. The mansion looked wrong from the road, not ruined, worse, controlled after damage. One corner of the South Service courtyard was blackened where something had burned hot and fast. 2 windows in the staff wing were boarded already, the speed of the repair more unsettling than the attack itself. Armed men moved over the gravel in wet silence. Somebody had washed blood from the steps, but not well enough. Rain had thinned it into pink along the grout lines. The first thing I saw when I got out of the car was Marta's shawl on the ground beside the back entrance. The second was the bullet hole in the stone behind it. I ran before Dante could stop me. Inside, the staff corridor smelled like antiseptic, smoke, and boiled coffee left too long on heat. A young guard I didn't know was slumped on a chair outside the infirmary with a bandage around his head, and both hands wrapped so badly I wanted to fix them by instinct. When he saw me, he stood too fast, wavered, and sat again. "Marta?" I asked. He pointed inside. She was propped up in bed, pale under the yellow bedside lamp, one shoulder strapped tight beneath a clean dressing. Her silver hair was braided back more severely than usual, which somehow made the injury seem ruder. She looked at me, at my face, and sighed. "You look awful," she said. The relief was so sharp it hurt. "You were shot, grazed, that's not a better word. It is to me." I crossed the room and sat too carefully on the chair beside her bed. As if gentleness now could undo the violence that had put her there. "What happened?" "3 men came through the south courtyard dressed as delivery staff," she said. "One had the wrong shoes." I blinked. She gave me a tired, sidelong look. "You're not the only woman in this house who notices details." I nearly laughed and nearly cried at the same time. "I moved your brother before they reached the hall," she went on. "Then one of them made the mistake of assuming I was old enough to be slow." My throat tightened. "Marta, don't." Her voice sharpened just enough to hold. "If you start thanking me, I'll feel elderly and dramatic." The doctor entered then, checked her pulse, and shooed me out with professional impatience. In the corridor, Dante waited beside the window at the end of the hall, coat still damp, one hand in his pocket, the other hanging at his side with too much stillness for a man who had driven through gunfire twice in one night. "She's alive," I said. "Yes, because she protected my brother." His gaze held mine. "Because she protects what's in her house." The wording landed deeper than it should have. I looked past him at the boarded windows, at the men crossing the courtyard below like pieces moved by anger. "This is what it costs," I said. "Yes, not denial, not comfort, only the truth." A shape shifted at the far end of the corridor. Nino appeared carrying 2 suit jackets over one arm and a paper cup of broth in the other, as if chaos were merely a scheduling inconvenience. "Excellent," he said when he saw me upright. "No fainting, I hate catching people, my shoulder has standards." "What happened to your jacket?" I asked. He looked at the torn side seam with deep offense. "Gunfire," he said, "or envy, hard to say." Then, lowering his voice, "Maria cried for 6 full seconds when she saw this tear. I may frame it." Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Nino looked smug. "Thank you, that was for morale." Dante took the broth from him. "Status, house secured for the next 10 minutes, Nino said. "After that, who knows? Also, the harbor contact is ready." Something passed between the 2 men. I felt it before I understood it. "What harbor contact?" Dante looked back at me. "You and Nico are leaving." The corridor narrowed around the words. "No, this isn't negotiation. You said that last time, and you should have listened better." I stared at him. "You don't get to decide I disappear because your world is inconveniently violent." His face did not change. "My world is no longer theoretical to you." I noticed. "Good." He took an envelope from his coat and handed it to me. Inside were 2 passports under false names, ferry tickets. Cash bound with a paper band, a key. I looked up so fast my vision swam. "You already decided. I already prepared." "That's different." "Yes." I hated how much it hurt that he had planned for my absence. Nino shifted awkwardly, which on a man his size looked like a wardrobe moving itself. "For what it's worth," he muttered, "the harbor house is small but the bread is decent." I closed the envelope. "I'm not going." Dante stepped closer, lowering his voice so the guards at either end of the corridor could not hear. "If you stay, they keep using you to reach me. If I go, they've already won." A flicker, brief and dangerous, crossed his expression. "This isn't about winning. It is to the people dying downstairs." That landed. I saw it land. His eyes went briefly to the infirmary door where Marta lay, then back to me. "I am asking once," he said. "Take your brother and go." It was the closest thing to pleading I thought he was capable of, which was why I knew he meant it. An hour later, I stood on the harbor with Nico beside me and a salt wind cutting through my coat. Palermo's night port was all rusted chains, diesel, and gulls screaming over black water. Father Emilio, a priest with tired eyes and the practical posture of a man who had helped more sinners than saints, waited beside a small passenger ferry that would leave before dawn for Naples. Nico held the envelope Dante had given me and refused to look at my face. "You should come," he said. "I know, you're staying for him." The honesty of it stripped me clean. "I'm staying because if I leave now, people who bled for us did it for a future I didn't have the courage to look at." "That's not an answer." "No." I stared past him at the cargo line where dockworkers were loading wrapped household parcels. One bundle caught my eye, a length of white linen marked at the hem with the same doubled stitch notation from the hidden page. Quarry Gate, midnight, another trap for Dante. Cold moved through me with astonishing clarity. There it was, my exit, papers in my pocket, my brother alive. The exact shape of the life I had been trying to drag us toward since I was 16 and old enough to know rent collectors respected nothing but money and fear. I could take it. I could let the fairy swallow my name and never again hear Italian fall silent when one man entered a room. Instead, I took the envelope, split the cash in half, pressed the passports into Nico's hand, and said, "Get on the boat." His face broke open with anger and fear. "Alina, listen to me. Go with Father Emilio, use the key, don't wait for letters. Don't come back unless I send for you myself. You're choosing him." I looked at the stitch code on the cargo bundle and then at the water beyond it, black and endless. "No," I said softly. "I'm choosing with my eyes open." I kissed his forehead, shoved the rest of the cash into his coat pocket, and stepped back before my body remembered how to beg. Then I turned away from the ferry, from safety, from the last clean exit I was ever likely to have, and I walked back into the dark. I didn't make it past the fish market. The harbor road behind the stalls was nearly empty at that hour, only wet cobbles and shuttered kiosks and the sharp saltrot stink of the day still clinging to the drains. I had taken 3 turns to make sure no one followed me, and had just started to believe I might actually reach the main road when a black car rolled soundlessly out from the shadow of a warehouse. Giacomo got out. I stopped because running would have insulted both of us. "You went back," he said. "You expected me to?" His mouth moved once. "Yes," rain shone on the shoulders of his coat. Up close, he looked older than he did in the mansion, not weaker, just used. "You marked the harbor cargo," I said. He inclined his head slightly. I wanted to know whether he had chosen correctly. By sending me away, by seeing what you are. Anger steadied me more than fear. "And what am I?" The first thing he's looked at twice in a year. I almost told him he was insane, then I remembered the chapel, the kitchen, the kiss he had stopped too late and too soon. "You're betraying him," I said. Giacomo looked toward the dark water beyond the roofs. "I am preserving what his father built. By using heroin roots, by using fear where fear works." He met my eyes again. "Dante confuses control with morality, Alessio does not. Men follow the version of power that survives. And Lucia?" I asked before I knew I would. He went still. "There, not all names were safe to touch." "What about her?" he said. I took one step closer. "Laundry hook, white linen, that scar on his wrist. Something happened in a laundry room, didn't it? And whatever it was, you were there." For the first time since I'd known him, Giacomo looked as if the ground beneath him had shifted a fraction. Then the back door of the car opened. Alessio Romano emerged without hurry. He was handsome in the way old paintings of tyrants were handsome, cultivated, composed, every gesture rehearsed by someone who had never once mistaken kindness for useful currency. Older than Dante by perhaps 15 years, elegant camel coat, gloves, a face lined not by guilt but by contempt. "Alina Belandi," he said, as if greeting a guest late to dinner. "You have caused extraordinary administrative fatigue." I said nothing. That seemed to amuse him. "She does that," Giacomo murmured. Alessio's gaze drifted over me. "He sent you away and you came back. Interesting. It would be flattering if it weren't strategically unfortunate." "You ambushed his cars," I said. "Yes, you burned his house, a corner of it." "Let's not be melodramatic." The ease of him made nausea rise in my throat. He moved closer, studying my face with frank curiosity. Dante was always vulnerable to women who looked breakable and refused to behave properly. I understood then that he knew Lucia too, not abstractly, personally. The listener inside me, the part that had been piecing together every wrong stitch since the first night, went cold. He had been there, that night, in the room Dante never described. "You let her die," I said. The amusement left his expression. For one beat the market seemed to disappear around us. Only rain, only dark. Giacomo's voice came low. Enough, but Alessio was still looking at me. "You do read quickly." She was his sister. "She was leverage," Alessio said, "and your Dante learned the lesson, or almost learned it. Then he met you and began mistaking hesitation for virtue." Nino jaw flexed. "This is unnecessary. Everything human is unnecessary," Nino said lightly. "That's the point." There it was. The mirror, Dante without a boundary. Dante if pain had fermented into worship of power instead of discipline. The shape he feared. The shape Giacomo had chosen because it looked like survival. I swallowed past the taste of iron. "He won't become you." "No," Alessio said. "He'll kill enough men trying not to." He gestured to the guards behind the car. "Bring her." They took me to an old dye cellar below one of the family's abandoned textile warehouses on the edge of the quarry road. I knew it by smell before sight. Old starch, lime, damp stone, rusted rails where linen carts must once have run. History never really left, it just changed industries. They tied my wrists to the arm of a wooden chair with cord too thick to cut by friction. not my ankles, a mistake. Giacomo stayed after the others left. He stood near the single hanging bulb, hands in his pockets, looking at me as if we were both trapped in the consequences of men's ideas. You should have taken the ferry, he said. I know he would have let you go. I know, then why didn't you? Because when Dante told me to stay where he could reach me. Some ruined and stubborn part of me had heard safety in it and been disturbed by how much that mattered. Instead I said, because you marked the linen and you knew I'd see it. A tired breath left him. Yes, so this is still a test. It was, he said. Now it's damage control. He crouched in front of me then, voice dropping. Listen to me carefully. Alessio wants Dante at the quarry laundry house before dawn, alone if possible, if not bleeding. He intends to end the Salvator line where the old laundry routes begin. And you? His face tightened in a way that might once have been shame. I intended to force Dante to choose power again. I did not intend this. You chose it anyway. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. When he stood, something thin and metal slid from his pocket to the floor near my shoe, a pin, small, silver. Seam ripper edge sharpened by use. He did not look down. Neither did I. Then he left and locked the cellar door behind him. I sat very still until the footsteps faded. After that, I bent, trapped the pin beneath my heel, and worked it up with aching fingers until I could reach it. It took 12 minutes to saw halfway through the chair cord, and 2 more to hide the cut when footsteps passed overhead. Under the chair, I used the pin to scratch a single word into the wood where a careful man might kneel and look. Giacomo. Then I pulled one thread from the hem of my coat and tied a white strip of lining to the leg of the chair, low enough to miss at first glance. Linen, white, my language now. Above me, somewhere in the old warehouse, a door slammed. The lock turned. Captivity turns time into texture, not hours, surfaces, the damp grit under my shoe where I tested each step. The rough chair arm biting my wrists as I kept the cut cord in place and pretended helplessness whenever footsteps passed. The hanging bulb's faint buzz. The small, hidden comfort of the silver pin warm in my palm. Fear came and went. What stayed was attention. That surprised me. I had always assumed courage would feel bigger if it ever found me. Brighter, something righteous and obvious. Instead, it felt like counting breaths and listening for which man dragged his left foot on the stone stairs. At some point, a plate of bread and cheese appeared on a stool by the wall. I left it untouched until the second visit, then took only the water. Let them think I was weaker than I was. It was the first useful lesson my father ever gave me. Hungry people are underestimated until they stop being hungry. The third time the door opened, it was Nino's voice I heard before I saw him. Respectfully, he was saying to someone above the stairs, "This building is damp, ugly, and offensively lacking in snacks." I closed my eyes once in relief, so sharp it nearly made me dizzy. The voices moved away. Not Nino then, one of the guards laughing at the imitation, but the laugh mattered. If Nino's name was being mocked on the stairs, it meant Dante's men were close enough to haunt them already. I waited 2 more minutes. Then I cut the rest of the cord, slipped my wrists free and moved. The door was locked from the outside. The hinges, however, were old, pin between fingers, upper hinge first, pressure, twist. Metallic complaint, stop when footsteps thudded overhead, continue when they passed. By the time the first hinge pin loosened, my hands were slick. The second came easier. I had just lifted the door a fraction from its frame when the bolt shot back from outside. I dropped into the chair and whipped the cut cord over my wrists 1 second before the door swung open. Alessio came in alone. He closed the door behind him and looked at the untouched bread with mild distaste. "You really are making this tedious." I said nothing. He walked once around the chair, taking his time. "Do you know why Dante hates heroin so personally?" I kept my face blank and let silence do what it did best. Alessio stopped in front of me. Because the night his sister died, one of the guards on the laundry corridor was high enough not to hear her. The words punched straight through me. I did not move. That was the only victory available. He smiled without warmth. "There, now you know the shape of him. I am generous with women who interest men I intend to break." My throat tightened around fury. "You are generous with corpses too?" His eyes cooled. "Careful." "Why?" I asked. "So I die believing you're inevitable." Something sharp flashed in his expression then, not anger, vanity cut open. "Good." He leaned close enough for me to smell expensive tobacco in the lining of his coat. "He'll come. Men like Dante always come for the one thing they should abandon." Then he straightened and turned toward the door. I made my move when his hand touched the latch. Chair over, wood cracking stone. My wrists free, the silver pin buried to the hilt in the side of his neck, not enough to kill, enough to blind the room. He shouted and lurched back. I yanked the cellar door open and ran. The warehouse above was a skeleton of old industry. Broken dye vats, hanging chains, rails for linen carts, moonlight leaking in through cracked panes high overhead. Men shouted from the far loading bay. Someone fired. Brick exploded beside me. I ducked behind a cart and saw it then, a white thread tied to the iron stair rail at ankle height. Not mine, Nino's. Only he would leave a rescue signal that looked like a tailor's joke. I followed it. Gunfire broke out from the west wall, heavy, coordinated, salvetter men. Then Dante was there, not like in stories. Not in slow motion. Fast, real, terrible. He came through the loading bay smoke with 2 men at his back and blood on the side of his face that wasn't his. One glance found me, one changed him. I don't remember crossing the space between us. I remember the collision. His hands at my ribs, at the back of my neck, checking, counting, confirming, my face against the hard line of his shoulder. The fact that neither of us spoke because speech would have broken something neither of us could afford to drop. Then he pulled back just enough to look at me. Are you hurt? No, you're bleeding, not mine. His thumb swept once beneath my eye, wiping away somebody else's blood. Almost number 7 if fear hadn't already burned the almost out of it. Nino barreled up at our side, panting. I would like formal recognition, he announced, for finding the secret stairs while underfed. I laughed once on a sob. He pointed at me, triumphant and appalled. See, everyone becomes unstable around this family. Behind us, more shots, a shouted order. Giacomo's voice somewhere in the upper dark, impossible to place. Dante turned his body to shield mine on instinct alone. Take her out, he told Nino. No, I caught Dante's sleeve. Alessio told me about Lucia. The name stopped him harder than gunfire. He said the guard outside the laundry corridor was high, I said. He wanted me to know before he killed you. Dante's face emptied of all visible feeling. I understood then what restraint really cost him. From the catwalk above, Giacomo's voice dropped into the warehouse like a blade. It was supposed to be different. We all looked up. He stood at the rail, gun lowered but not discarded, rain leaking in behind him through the cracked panes. Older suddenly, not in years, in consequences. I kept Dante alive after, he said to me, but his eyes were on Dante. He was 18, covered in her blood. If I had let grief guide him then, Alessio would have eaten the family whole. You let him cover the guard's habit, Dante said. Your father ordered it. My father is dead. Yes, Giacomo said. And you still want to believe the house can be clean. That was the slow mystery turning over in the dark. Not just betrayal, doctrine. Dante's voice went very quiet. You chose him, I chose survival. Alessio's laugh floated from somewhere beyond the warehouse doors, and now neither of you gets it. Explosions cracked from the quarry road outside. Final lines were being drawn. Dante looked at me once, at the cut on my wrists, at the blood on my coat, at the white thread still tied to the stair rail. Then he said, stay behind me. This time I did. By dawn, one of us would not walk out of that place unchanged. The last battle happened where Dante had first learned that white linen could hold more blood than a child should ever see. He told me that later. At the time, all I knew was that the old laundry house beyond the warehouse smelled of lye, rain, and memory, so thick it seemed to have pooled in the cracked tile drains. Long troughs ran beneath iron pipes. Rusted pulley lines still hung overhead where sheets had once been hoisted to dry. And through the broken back doors, quarry fog rolled in low and pale, making the men moving through it look already half-ghost. Dante pushed me behind an overturned pressing table while gunfire shattered the far windows. Nino, he said without turning, with her. Nino slid in beside me, breathing hard. I'd like it noted, he muttered, checking his magazine, that this is not how I imagined dying. I thought there'd be better lighting. You're not dying, I said. That confidence is adorable. Across the room, Giacomo disappeared into shadow after a brief exchange of fire. Salvetter men pushed from the east door. Romano men answered from the boiling room. In between them stood Alessio, dry-eyed and elegant even now, one hand gloved around a pistol, the other holding the old world together by pure contempt. He didn't shout. That was what made him monstrous. He simply kept moving men. Dante moved toward him with the same frightening efficiency I had seen on Quarry Road, but not unchanged. There was rage in him now, disciplined into something even colder. Not blind, chosen. I knew then what victory might cost. A burst of bullets ripped through the stacked linen racks above us. Bundles split open, white cloth poured down like surrender. One parcel hit the floor by my knee and broke apart. Inside were stamped root cloths, the same laundry markers used to disguise deliveries. An idea came all at once. I grabbed one and flattened it against the tile. The code marks on the edge matched the hidden page pattern. West line, boiler feed, valve room. These routes, I said too fast, they aren't just deliveries, they're the old steam lines. Nino stared. I'm sorry, should I be a tailor now? The pressure valves, I said, pointing across the room toward the rusted boilers behind Alessio's men. If those lines still connect, the back wall vents to the quarry chute. His eyes widened. You want to turn the building into a furious kettle? Yes, That is the most alarming thing anyone has ever said to me. And I knew a man who married a flamenco dancer after 12 hours. He grabbed the cloth. How? I pointed to the marks. Red stitch means release, double cut means jam. Nino stared one beat longer, then slapped my shoulder. You are terrifying. Stay alive. He took off low behind the machinery, muttering something that sounded like a prayer against valves. Dante reached the center trough just as Alessio did. They faced each other across rusted tile and old drains, mirror and refusal. You brought her back into this, Dante said. Alessio smiled thinly. You did. The moment you noticed her, a shot cracked from the catwalk. Giacomo, he had aimed at Alessio. Alessio turned and fired back in the same motion. Giacomo jerked, staggered against the rail, and for one suspended second hung there between loyalties, before crashing down through a half-rotted linen rack in a storm of splintered wood and white cloth. The whole room stopped breathing. Dante moved first, not toward Giacomo, toward Alessio. Their guns emptied fast, then hands, then brute force. It should have looked savage, it looked precise. Every blow Dante landed had years in it. Every block Alessio made carried the arrogance of a man who had never mistaken love for strength. When Alessio drew a knife from his boot, I was already moving. Dante, he turned a fraction, enough. The blade meant for his ribs tore across his side instead. I reached the valve wheel at the back boiler line just as Nino surfaced from the steam pit, black with soot and well-dyed. Good news, he shouted over the gunfire. Everything here is a fire hazard. I seized the wheel and he seized the second. Together we forced them open. Steam screamed through the old lines, men shouted. Fog thickened inside the room in white, blinding bursts. Alessio lunged again. Dante caught his wrist, twisted, and drove him backward into the center trough where laundry water had once run red, then clean, then red again. Giacomo, half buried under collapsed rack wood, lifted his gun with a hand that shook. For a moment I thought he meant Dante. Instead, he shot the Romano guard advancing on me from the west door. The man fell at my feet. Giacomo looked at Dante through pain and steam and said, I chose wrong. Then Alessio shot him through the chest. There are deaths that make noise after the body falls. Giacomo's was one of them. A long, quiet collapsing of everything he had believed survival required. Dante saw it. So did I. It cost him. Alessio smiled through blood. There. Now you're alone enough to lead. Dante's face changed, not into Alessio's, never that, into something stripped, honest in the worst way. He drove the knife hand into the trough edge until the blade dropped, wrapped both hands around Alessio's coat front, and said with terrifying softness, No. I'm just done letting men like you teach me what strength is. Then he put a bullet through Alessio Romano's heart. Silence followed in strange pieces. Steam hissed. A man groaned in the far corner. Outside, quarry rain tapped the broken glass. I went to Giacomo first. He was already leaving. His eyes found mine, then Dante's over my shoulder. She came back, he whispered, as if that settled some final argument none of us had time to win. Blood touched the corner of his mouth. Don't waste that. Then he was gone. Nino removed his hat, which I had never seen him wear in battle and could not imagine where he'd found. Well, he said quietly, this has ruined my appetite in a way I didn't previously think possible. Dante stood in the middle of the old laundry house with blood down his side and white steam curling around him like judgment. I crossed to him. He looked at me as if confirming one last impossible fact. I took a strip of fallen white linen and pressed it to the wound at his ribs. Same gesture, entirely different weight. He covered my hand with his. Around us, men lowered guns. The house held. At the far end of the room, dawn began to gray the quarry windows. Dante looked past me at Alessio's body, then at Giacomo's, then back at the white cloth between our hands. It is over. War ended untidily. That was the first truth of after. No one woke the next morning healed. No music rose over the estate. The dead did not become noble because we survived them. Men limped. Walls kept their cracks. Marta's shoulder ached in damp weather, and she became even less patient with foolishness, which I had not thought physically possible. The south courtyard stone remained faintly pink no matter how many times it was scrubbed, and I knew enough by then not to call that symbolic out loud. But some things changed because they had to. The heroin routes were burned, publicly as far as Dante's world allowed public acts. 3 warehouses shuttered, 2 front companies dissolved, old alliances snapped. New ones formed around the fact that Dante Salvator had chosen a narrower kind of power, and would kill for that choice as surely as his father had killed for the wider one. Nico wrote from Naples twice in the first month and then less often, which I took as health. Father Emilio sent a note in steadier handwriting confirming my brother had enrolled in school under the false name, and immediately developed opinions about literature. That felt like forgiveness from a distance. I stayed, not because I was trapped, that mattered, it had to matter. I stayed because the morning after the battle I walked through the mansion and saw Marta directing repair crews from a chair with one arm in a sling, Nino arguing with Maria over the nutritional value of olive oil, and Dante standing alone in the old chapel with his head bowed not in prayer but in silence too private to trespass on. I saw the cost, all of it, and when I looked for the girl who had wanted only escape, I found she was still inside me but no longer alone, so I stayed with my eyes open. By late autumn, the house had a different rhythm, less fear at random hours, fewer men I didn't know, more daylight in rooms once used only for strategy and punishment. Dante gave me the old linen rooms because I had already begun ordering them without permission, which he pointed out dryly and then did nothing to stop. I restored tablecloths, chapel cloths, wedding lace from family trunks nobody had touched in years. Marta said if I kept going I would eventually reorganize the dead. One afternoon I found Lucia's veil. It had been folded into a cedar box beneath moth-eaten shawls in a storage chest no one had opened since before the attack. Communion lace, fine as breath, torn near one edge where someone had once caught it in panic. I sat by the window with needle and silk thread and repaired it slowly, not hiding the mend completely. Strong enough to hold, visible enough to be honest. When Nino wandered in carrying two pairs and his eternal grievance, he stopped at the table. "What's that?" "Her veil," I said. He went uncharacteristically quiet. "Ah," I kept sewing. "Too much?" "No." He sat on the edge of the opposite table, studying the repaired lace. "Actually, that's the first sensible thing anyone has done in this family for years." I smiled. "And the pears? One for me, one for Maria. She claims fruit is not a love language, but she continues accepting citrus. So I remain optimistic." "You've been optimistic for months. That's because despair is fattening." He leaned closer to the veil. "You left the mend visible." "Yes." "Why?" I drew the thread through and looked at the window light shining through the repaired tier. "Because pretending something never split doesn't make it stronger." Nino stared at me for a beat too long, then he sighed theatrically. "Wonderful. Now I have to go report that line to the boss and deepen everyone's emotional damage." "Please don't." "No promises." He left with the pears and the expression of a man carrying both produce and classified material. That evening Dante found me in the kitchen, not the grand one. The smaller family kitchen off the back terrace, where the light was softer and Maria allowed only people she respected to touch her wooden spoons. Rain tapped the windows. A pot of tomato sauce cooled on the stove. My repaired veil lay folded beside me because I had not yet decided whether returning it to the cedar box would feel like reverence or cowardice. Dante came in without the rest of the house attached to him for once. No guards in the doorway, no files, just dark trousers, open collar, tiredness he did not bother disguising. His gaze went to the veil first. "You found it." "Yes." He picked it up very carefully. That, more than any speech, told me what Lucia had been to him. "I mended the tear," I said. "Not all the way invisible." I noticed. A long pause passed, warm kitchen, cooling sauce, rain. The ordinary had become so rare that it felt almost illicit. Then he reached into his pocket and set a small black ring box on the table between us. I looked at it, then at him, then back. "Dante, I know, that's not a sentence. It's the only one I have at the moment." Despite myself, I laughed softly. His eyes held mine. "I don't have a clean version of this. I don't think we own one." "No." He rested one hand flat on the table. "Alina, if I ask, it isn't because I think love fixes what I am. It doesn't. If I ask, it's because the only place in my day that feels honest now is the space where you are. Because when I sent you away, I learned distance was not mercy if it cost me your face. Because when you walked back from that harbor, you chose me with full knowledge, and I have no right to ask for more than that." My throat tightened. He opened the box. The ring was old, not flashy. A narrow band with a small diamond and two tiny chips of dark stone set into the shoulders, like night bracing light. "It was my mother's," he said. "She wore it until the gold thinned." I looked up at him, tears coming without permission. "This is not a fairy tale." "No." His mouth softened at the edge. "Quiet one, it's a table, a house, my name. My worst days, the fact that I will still be dangerous tomorrow. And the fact that I will spend the rest of my life trying not to let that danger land where you stand." The nickname undid me more than the ring. This time it held no chill, no warning. Only home, hard one and handled carefully. I put my hand in his. "Yes," I said, and the word shook. "Yes, if you mean all of it." He slid the ring onto my finger with the same slow deliberateness he had once used to tie linen around a cut wrist. Then he bowed his head and pressed his mouth to my knuckles. Outside, rain moved softly over the terrace stones. Inside, the sauce cooled, the veil waited, and the future arrived without any music at all. 9 months later, the house sounded different in the mornings, not safer. Houses like this never became safe in any pure sense. Men still came through the front gates with old loyalties in their shoulders and new calculations in their eyes. Phones still rang late. Names were still spoken more carefully in some rooms than others. Palermo had not turned innocent because I put flowers in the breakfast room or because Nino, by some miracle of persistence and olive oil, had finally bullied Maria into agreeing to Sunday coffee. But the mansion breathed now. Windows stayed open longer. Marta had resumed terrorizing repairmen from a position of full mobility and considered that better than prayer. Nico visited twice that spring, taller each time, carrying books and the peculiar confidence of boys who had nearly died young and then been forced into a future anyway. He and Dante remained formal in each other's presence, which I had learned was their version of trust. As for me, I had taken over the linen rooms officially enough that invoices came with my name on them. I restored family textiles for the house, and increasingly, for half the old women of Palermo who had heard there was a girl at Salvator's estate who could make torn lace behave again. It was honest work done in a dishonest world. The contradiction suited me more than I liked to admit. That morning I was in the small workroom off the south corridor, standing over a christening cloth older than the Republic when the needle slipped. It barely counted as injury. A quick sting at the side of my finger, one bright bead of blood, nothing more. Still, habit rose before pain did. I reached automatically for the folded white linen square at my elbow and pressed it to the cut. Cold water, I thought instantly. Don't let it set. Behind me, a quiet voice said, "There it is again." I turned. Dante stood in the doorway watching me. He wore no jacket, only rolled sleeves and dark trousers, the day not yet armored around him. Sun from the corridor windows fell across one side of his face, leaving the scar near his wrist pale and visible. He had been home more this month, not free. Men like him did not become free. But present, which in our life was its own kind of vow renewed daily. "What is?" I asked, though I already knew. He came closer. "The way you worry about the cloth before the wound." Heat moved through me, soft and old and still somehow new. "It was one drop," I said. "It was your finger, you've had worse." His gaze held mine. "That was never the point." He took the linen from my hand, inspected the tiny stain with absurd seriousness, then wrapped the clean side around my finger himself. White cloth, warm hands. Same gesture, entirely transformed. I watched his mouth while he tied the knot. He noticed, of course he noticed. "You still do that too," he murmured. "What? Look at my hands when you don't want to answer honestly." I should have denied it. Instead I smiled because after everything, some forms of being known become a place to rest. On the worktable lay Lucia's veil, preserved now in tissue, and beside it the christening cloth with its faint weakness near one corner. A strong mend if handled well. A visible one if touched by light. Dante touched the veil box lightly with one finger. "Marta says you've started frightening the contractors. They deserve it. She says you use silence as a weapon now. I learned from experts. That drew the thing I loved most and trusted least at Versda." The rare, real curve of his mouth when amusement won cleanly. Then his expression settled into something quieter. "Nico wrote this morning," he said. "He may stay in Naples another year." The old ache moved gently through me, not grief now. Just distance with a face. That's good. Yes. Neither of us said what sat beneath it, that choosing Dante had cost me certain ordinary versions of family forever, not my brother himself, not love. But ease, simplicity. A life no longer interrupted by men at gates and careful phone calls after midnight. Some costs remained alive even after the bleeding stopped. I touched the knot he had tied around my finger. "Do you ever wonder," I asked slowly, "what might have happened if I'd boarded the ferry?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Only because you would have found me." His hand came up and cupped the back of my neck, gentle and unanswerable at once. "No," he said. "Because some nights I still think about what it cost you to turn around." There it was, the unresolved thread that no ring or rebuilt courtyard could fully smooth flat. Love did not erase cost. It gave it a name and asked whether you would choose it again. I leaned into his palm anyway. In the courtyard below, Nino's voice rose through the open window in theatrical outrage. "Maria, if you add more olive oil, I become a cautionary tale." Maria answered with what sounded like a wooden spoon striking a counter in moral correction. I laughed and Dante's thumb moved once at the base of my neck. "Quiet one," he said, the name now so warm it made the whole path from corridor blood to this bright room exist at once inside two words. "Yes," he bent and kissed the white linen tied around my finger before he kissed my mouth. Outside, the house went on being dangerous and alive. Inside, the knot held. And I have thought about that ferry more than once. So tell me this, if you had loved him enough to walk back into the dark with your eyes open, and it cost you the life you once thought you were saving, would you have chosen Dante too?